The first reaction was, okay, the next person that walks in a room, I'm going to tell them about, Sandra, what you go through. I don't want to listen to your problems, but then you often go to the second and more realistic. And I've been in the professional service industry for quite some time, and that's an industry of people. And whether it's NASA scientists or doctors or lawyers or real estate professionals, there are a lot of the same issues. And particularly through the last several years, the components for being successful in this environment are, as a leader, are a high degree of resilience, a very high degree of empathy, and also an increased emphasis on listening. And Jeff has heard me say this before, and I use this as shorthand: CEO equals CLO, Chief Listening Officer. And the thing about adversity is it's never relative. If you break your wrist, you don't say, thank God I don't have cancer. If you're the parent who's struggling with one child and an illness with one parent, you don't look at the person who has 3 children and dealing with issues with 2 parents, which are all circumstances we've dealt with here. And you have to understand that it is just not relative, and you have to deal with the issues of the moment. The empathy part today is extraordinarily important. I've talked to a number of people in leadership roles, and we have a common view. Not only is it taken more, one of the biggest challenges is the need for to support your senior professionals over the last 2-3 years in a way that you hadn't in quite some time. And you sort of have to figure out, how do you create the circumstances? How do you know for yourself to create that combination of resilience so that you can continue to remain empathetic? And Sandra, as you mentioned, everyone had different issues during COVID, whether exercised less, saw people less. It was really a moment in time to lead by, where leader, it was an interesting, it was and is a remaining period, interesting time, because leadership by example has never been more important, but it may be different kinds of leadership. It's right from the beginning, one of the things we did was we sat outside in the cold in ski jackets and had pizzas and sat 6 feet apart. I met people for walks on the beach. We played tennis. Jeff knows I still play basketball, but we had to wait till the vaccines came in before we resumed those kinds of activities. And it was this constant reminder, remember what was normal and the pleasure of what was normal, because every time you do it, it makes you feel good. The other part of that was, notwithstanding leading by example, and another example, which was also sort of a joke, was the last 2 Christmases, a little less so this year, leadership by example was advertising that you were going away and that you were disconnecting and sending a message to the other people in the organization. And, certainly for those of us who grew up, that you were always connected, the last thing you did was advertise any vacation you took, but that was very important to let people know that it was okay to do that. And I think probably the last point, Jeff, and I'll now turn it over, is we deal very much with the question of returning to the office and what are the implications of not being in the office. Probably each of us have dealt with it in different ways. And one of the points that my colleagues and I make, look, if it's been so wonderful, why are we experiencing the worst and broadest degree of mental health issues that we ever had in our careers. And I hope that some of those studies you've done on isolation will get broader distribution, because there's a negative inertia that's developed not to commute, but very much offset by the implications of sitting in a room by yourself, regardless of your family. So with that, that's okay, Jeff. I'll turn it over to any questions.
Perfect.
Or chat.
Well, I think because we only have a couple minutes left, tying with what you just said there, Mitch, I get a question that I have for you, Sandra, and I know the research is vast and it's constantly going, but is there something that jumps off at the top of your head of maybe a takeaway regarding what Mitch just said about the isolation that not only is applicable for the future astronaut missions, but for the everyday listener here and when they watch the recording, that they can adapt and apply to their lives?
Yeah, thanks. And gosh, I just so appreciate this conversation, and what you and Mitch have shared is so powerful. The point that Mitch just made about that return to office, I've struggled with that. I've found, so I think one thing that we see in the literature is we are not great gauges of our own needs, especially when we're, sleep deprived. There's a lot of literature showing we just don't do a good job of self-evaluation. And one of the things I've noticed about myself in the context of what Mitch was talking about is that inertia. That's the word I was looking for earlier, of being home and being alone, and kind of justifying to myself that I could continue to do that. And so knowing the literature, having all the knowledge there, not all the knowledge, but having the knowledge there to know better, right? But yet rationalizing to myself why I'm good to stay on my own. But we've had a return to work of 1 day a week, and I try to talk myself out of it every time, but then I go because I have to. And when I'm there, it's amazing. I had the most amazing time with my colleagues yesterday, with my team and a couple of folks. We were just talking and just being together. And I was really emotional about it last night. I was like, I have just missed that so much. And it brought back such an excitement for the work that we're getting to do. And so I think, sorry, I've rambled, but I think that accountability to something beyond our own kind of gut feel about, kind of what we try to rationalize or fool ourselves sometimes into thinking that we know what's best, but sometimes we need that objective accountability, whether it's an objective measure like we look at in the literature, or people around us to help take that step forward and engage in those behaviors that might be a little bit more difficult, but really for our benefit.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking with everything that you said, and I was looking over my notes as well, because I know, like Mitch, I try to, the notes helps me remember stuff, and how complex it truly is, whether you're doing an analog preparing for a space mission or real life applications. When you talk about sleep, nutrition, and then behavioral health and mental health, they're so interconnected, because it's not, you eat crap food, you feel like crap. You don't get a good night's sleep, you don't want to eat healthy, you don't want to work out, and then what do? Not want to talk to people. So a lot of times I look at it creates those downward spirals, but it can go in the other direction, upward spirals of trying to eat something healthy can make you feel better. Like you said, that nudge of going back to work and having a good time. I'm gonna, to wrap this up, Mitch, last statement or comment, and then we'll end it with you, Sandra. But before I turn it over to both of you, thank you for participating and being here. This was really, really fantastic. But Mitch, go ahead.
Sandra, just on that last point, I so appreciate the candor, because not everyone's brave enough to say that. But and this relates to everyone. We found broadly, and again, this isn't my study, more anecdotal, the 50 pluses, they're coming back. The ones just entering the workforce, they're coming back. But it's those who are in their sort of mid-30s, mid-40s, and they say, look, I can do my job from home. I don't need the training. But what they have forgotten is that's not their only job. Their job is to do for others what those did for them. Because it's not, you don't skip, when you're training those who are just entering a workforce, you're not going all the way up. It's those who have 10, 15 years more experience. So people need to be reminded of what their responsibility is work-wise, civic-wise, and family-wise, and it's just not to do their task. Because if that's all their leaders did, they wouldn't have gotten to where they were.
And Sandra?
Mitch, thank you for that. That was really powerful and convicting, but I appreciate it. It's like that hard truth that it needs to be said and needs to be shared. And so appreciate what you've shared there. Yeah, so I thank you so much for the opportunity to come share today and to talk with you guys. This is just such a valuable discussion, and I've been inspired by what you guys have shared. I will say, when I applied for the position that I have, I did it as a joke. I never thought that they would actually call me back. I thought they were crazy. I kind of still sometimes think they are, but so if anybody's kind of thinking about those things and talks themselves out of it, just do it, because you could be completely not qualified and in over your head, but somehow get opportunity that comes your way. But yeah, so thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about resiliency and to learn from this great discussion. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say in the last 10 seconds is what you just said there. That's what hope and optimism is, believing in your own abilities.
Thank you.